Well, Bob Fletcher, what would we going to talk about tonight?
Well, I guess you know what everybody's been talking about for hundreds of years, I guess, and that's the weather. We can talk about the weather, and we have introduction into the weather system of some very strange things that we don't commonly have. We're not just talking about common weather structures, which of course we've been noticing the Midwest getting pulverized with tornadoes, and the hurricane season coming upon us with the prediction of having maybe 30 or 40% more hurricanes than usual.
And, basically we're seeing basically snow suddenly in the Middle West, in the middle of May, the end of May. I know I was down at the wharf here in Santa Cruz this last Sunday, a weekend, and basically the gentleman who owns one of the restaurants there said, have you ever seen as much wind as we're having now? He's been there probably for 30 or 40 years. And his comment to me was, I've never seen this much wind before. And he's talking about the wind here on the west coast of California. You're absolutely right. Something is altering our weather. What could that be? Is this simply an act of God, or is it possibly an act of men? Go right ahead.
Well, it may be partially, because it could be the act of man. As we know, they've been fooling with weather and weather control and alterations, and of course the Chinese now they've had this huge weather control operation for a few years. Once they were able to steal all the latest mischievous electronic weather manipulation that the United States has. But I'll tell you what I'm positive it is at this point. Again, I've talked about this before, and we're working on it to put it into a configuration so everybody will understand it too. But we do have an approaching astronomical problem, and that is the Nibiru, or Planet X, or whatever you want to call it. It's been given 3 or 4 different names. So
tornadoes, and certainly some of these tornadoes ordinarily they'll sit down on the ground for 2 or 3 minutes and wreak havoc. This last one that was certainly there, and it was going through, basically we were talking on the ground for 15 or 20 minutes, and suddenly just destroying everything in its path over something 17 miles long and 3 or 4 miles wide. Just massive destruction. But you go right ahead, Bob.
Well, there's several things going on right now. We have slowly approaching, and of course they've not been able to definitively calculate where or what, actually when the closest passing is going to be, but some point in time, possibly within the next year, maybe a few months, maybe 18 months. There is an anticipation and concern about the huge, what is the 10th planet, with this Nibiru that's been out and makes this huge 2,000 to 3,000 year orbit of the Earth, and they're genuinely anticipating it, and that's what I've been working on, is when I tried to find out where billions and billions of dollars have gone to here in the last 10, 20, 30 years, and how the increase of money is vanishing, and huge amounts of money, not the regular money stolen by criminals out of Washington, which is in the millions at a time, but where this money was going, and I finally figured it out.
But what does that have to do with this planet?
Well, what it has to do is they know it's coming. They are refusing to formally notify the people of the Earth in general. The elitists at the highest levels are building hideouts for themselves and all of this. It's starting to now, for the first time in the last couple of years, or even the last year, it's starting to flex its muscles by as it approaches other planets in our solar system. From the outer planets inward, it's been changing and altering and causing atmospheric changes on those planets. It may be even affecting the sun. And as of yesterday, NASA photographed with their observatory what is possibly the largest solar coronal hole, a hole in the atmosphere of the sun itself. And what this has permitted, which June 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, if there's any impact at all, we will feel it from this in terms of geomagnetic storms and aurora borealis that we're not used to at all around possibly both the poles of the Earth. and depending on when what they call major blasts of solar wind and magnetic fields have blasted out of this hole as of yesterday, and it will be about June the 2nd or the 3rd. It'll be crossing Earth's path. Now, depending on what direction the Earth is at the very time that these bombardments come from the solar magnetic storms, when they hit the Earth, depending on where those atmospheric holes are in our atmosphere, it will either permit or it will help to deflect these storms. If we happen to be aimed in the wrong direction, there are a couple of large openings in our own atmosphere. It will permit these huge storms of plasma coming from the sun.
Well, let me explain to our listeners. Sure. Basically, these can come in if they are of insufficient intensities. The gamma rays come in, they hit the oxygen molecules, they break off electrons, and then this whole suddenly a stream of electrons sweeps around the world as an electronic storm and simply fries the electronic grid. Now, basically, that is, of course, the danger of the solar flares and certainly or of an EMP nuclear attack in the stratosphere. Are you actually suggesting that this is a possibility?
Oh, absolutely.
But Bob, certainly, how could this be going on and we're not hearing about it?
Simply look up NASA, May 29th, and the word coronal hole. You can look it up and you can find their own pictures that they just took of this. But there is a reason for all of this increase. And it is, in my opinion, the incoming effect of this Planet 10, the Planet X, Nibiru, coming closer to our system, our system.
Okay, well, let's go to Robus. John is calling us from Spokane. John, do you have a question, comment?
Yes, I have a question. Bob, I was following Planet X, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, there were daily downloads of what was going on with it from the SOHO satellites up till about November 2008, and then I think they said technical difficulties and what have you, and they stopped. And I know that it was coming in from the south, and that you had Bill Gates put that telescope there in Chile, and you got all this stuff going on in Antarctica, and then the Vatican has its thing.
Right.
Okay, so, and then there was just a big blackout. You couldn't find any information. Talk shows, nobody's talking about it except for John Moore and you. So tell us more about Planet X, what your take is at this stage.
Oh, okay, I'd be glad to, and that's a good question. A few years back, I was saying 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it pretty much was acknowledged and then classified as really to be kept secret. And information on it was they tried to keep as much information as they could away from the general public, just on the possibility, well, actually the reality being, how do you tell the Earth that there may in reality have something that's going to come around and cause Noah's flood all over again? Now, timetable-wise, it's very difficult. Nobody's been able to come with a real good, accurate timetable on this thing. But it's now starting to be photographed at certain levels in certain locations on the Earth, aiming out in the right direction at the right time. And there are, like the Red Chinese and the Russians, have accepted the concept that it is coming back around. They have spent multi-billions, the same as the United States has, secretly with taking our money covertly and building all these underground facilities, not for you and I, but for themselves. And that's the reality. The bottom line in terms of the planet itself, if it is as has been described, it is about 5 times the size of the Earth. It's huge. It's very big. It's not expected to strike the Earth, but it's expected to pass the orbit of the Earth, coming in one time and going out. If it does this and passes as that closely to pass through, they anticipate just a multitude of gravitational alterations, magnetics, and all the rest of that, an effect that would be just devastating.
On that, if I may,
yes,
isn't that the reason why they chose Denver and up against on that side of the Rocky Mountains for continuity of government? And isn't that the reason why all those abandoned inland cities in China, or no?
No. All of that's accurate. When in fact all of this Earth changes takes place from the planet coming through again, and so not only are they already built in highlands, but they actually will be higher when the time comes that the geography of the Earth gets altered by this darn 10th planet swinging through our particular orbit. So yes, those Chinese cities and being kept empty. They're being created as the safe spots for a select few million Chinese. Yes, sir. And at the same time, we are, of course, spending money at not only the Denver airport as an underground, but there's like 100 of them located in different places in the mountainsides and in where they've taken over the old NORAD facility. That's been converted into a hideout for the elite.
And incidentally, I talked to Peter Pry in Washington, D.C. He was the executive director of the Congressional Commission on EMG attacks, and he was commenting that the Russians actually have a mountain, and they've hollowed out the hole inside of it. It will hold a couple of 100,000 people, at least 100,000.
That's just one. They started in 2010 to accomplish 5,000 hideouts for Russian people. That's how many they were doing, and some of them are as big as you're referring to. Some of them are the size of cities that could hold thousands and thousands of people. Okay, well, that was a good call.
It really was. And basically, of course, this is why we love having you on here. And basically, most of our listeners aren't even aware of these things, so this is not imaginary, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, I don't know. In general, there's been so many things going on that continually pointing to the government preparing and setting us up, I think, for obviously for martial law, for one thing, and at the same time puts them in a position to control us. And I unfortunately I believe that they are finally totally convinced and aware of a really disaster that's looming out there someplace. And what I'm referring to mostly is the potential of some kind of an intergalactic or a celestial, to use their term, a celestial impact. And what I'm talking about there is a quote of one of the Homeland Security upper echelon personalities a little while back at a meeting with the Russian counterpart in the Soviet Union, and set up a swap of some elite crowd control Russian trained troops from Russia to actually come to the United States. And to now, the way it was originally press released, it just looked like we were going to borrow or have 15,000 of their troops come over, and it didn't go too far beyond that. But apparently, what I found out through a friend of mine in Washington this last week, that the deal has been cut, and that it probably is about 100% sure that it will be an exchange of troops, so that we will send 15 or 20,000 American troops when the time comes, and they will send 15,000 Russian troops when the time arises, the need arises, and that the Russian troops will be placed in the Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland area, where, of course, we have the CIA and all those other locations of all of those, and, of course, major government, all within a couple 100-mile circle there.
Well, but Bob, what are you talking about? You're talking about some sort of a cosmic event, or you're talking about us being hit by you're talking about a small planet X or something like that, possibly colliding with Earth, and that people at the highest levels of our government and the Soviet government are concerned about this. They're concealing the truth from the American people, but they're planning, if something of this sort should happen, to bring about something about 18,000 Soviet troops to the United States, and a similar number of American troops would go to the Soviet Union. We sort of justify this because, we have our troops all over the world. We might have a shortage of troops here, but obviously we're never being told the truth behind anything that's going on today. And we have heard rumblings about this, that there is some sort of an agreement that if there was a cataclysmic event taking place, they would be stationing Russian troops in America and American troops in Russia. And it doesn't make sense unless you understand. Go right ahead, Bob.
And here's where all of a sudden it rang bells for me. Let's make the assumption that there was some astronomical impact, and that was the term they used, galactic impact. All right, so let's assume we were hit all of a sudden by either one or even a whole handful of space material. All right, instantly, of course, we have all kinds of problems. Okay, fires and everything else. Right now, what they're saying is that they would bring the Russians here, and they would be at in the installation areas where our corrupted government would most want to defend, and that we would send likewise a large number of troops over there, because if they would have no qualms in shooting Americans in the streets if they had to have control over the rioting. That all of a sudden rang a bell, rang to be sounding potentially true, because I, for one, I am convinced that this unknown planet is unknown only relative to the fact that a lot of people not wanting to talk about it, but that this 10th planet is out there, that it is coming in. It's coming in, and it's going to swing close to Earth. It is not a small item at all. It is gigantic, but that it trails along with it 5 to 7 moons of its own. These are, smaller planets. For the lack of a better terminology, they're being called moons, along with a whole 5,000-mile trail or even longer of space debris and junk. Now, all of that would be small, but the problem is, if the reality exists that this is coming through at some point in time in the future, swings around in a huge close orbit, and then goes back on out again, which is what the prediction is with this thing, that we will be almost totally, completely annihilated and wiped clean of human life. And it would be what they're claiming what caused Noah's original flooding, from the gravitational movement of the oceans, actually just pulling them right out of the seabeds, from the difference of the size of its gravitational pull. The size of this planet is this Nibiru is considered to be 47,000 miles diameter. It's about 4 or 5 times the size of Earth itself, and it has already affected the outer planets. They're not talking much about it, but you can find it. It's affecting the outer planets' temperature and all of that at this point in time. It's already, I think, that's the cause for all of the crazier weather that we've all been having on Earth. I believe it's already affecting our weather. It is affecting, like I say, things farther out in our solar system. Which, by the way, the other part of this coin is they have been spending, misdirecting, misappropriating, and just plain stealing billions and billions of dollars in a much bigger amount than normal. These guys, in my opinion, from the investigations I've been involved with for 20 years now, we now had an experience where just in the last few weeks or a few months, where Germany and other European countries had requested their gold to be given to them, their own gold that they own. As a matter of fact, 1,500 tons of gold is owned by Germany. They requested their gold when the money got bad just a little while back. Our government told them that they could not get it and could not even get an audit to show how much is really there until 7 years from now, 2020. Now, you got to step back and say, wait a minute. So crazy people like Bob Fletcher for years has been saying that the gold is already gone out of Fort Knox. It is gone. We're looking at a situation where they have stolen the gold and applied it to these projects and stolen other smaller amounts, including $2.3 trillion that Rumsfeld admitted to losing $2.3 trillion the day before the 9/11 event.
When do they think that if this were to come, when are they anticipating that we would begin to feel some influence from this as far as our weather?
Okay, well, we already are. It is absolutely already affecting us. They this last year, 9 months back, whenever. Well, I guess I want to try to sort of a follow-up. First off, we just did just on the news here. We had a little brief thing about Snowden information. The whistleblower that just decided to stay in Russia for a while now. His last little bit of information that kind of slipped out and stayed very much under the table, so to speak, just a couple of weeks ago. It was kind of an addendum. He was being interviewed by somebody, and he just sort of added this into it. And he said that, and the reason I'm
bringing this up and kind of emphasizing it because it fits right into some of the very things that I have been looking into and the things that I'm working on right now with my expose as it relates to why the governments of the entire world are doing these tremendous underground hideaway facilities for themselves, and places digging and going into the sides of mountains and what have you at tremendous taxpayers' expense. And by the way, you got to remember now, this is our tax dollars, and you couldn't find out if you went right in and with an army of congressmen behind you, you could not find anything out in terms of real serious information on these hidden facilities, particularly as to why they're doing it. They're just the fact that they take our money to do it is kind of like besides the point. It's like none of our business. But anyhow, to get back to Mr. Snowden, what a sidebar that he had presented just a couple of weeks ago. He said that one thing that the government, along with all the millions of other things they're keeping secret from us, one thing is that the government is almost positive scientifically in their discovery over the last few years that sometime in the next 6 months, and he particularly said very possible starting in September sometime, that we are going to be bombarded with extraordinary electromagnetic impulses from solar flares. And that these possibility, again, folks have to have a good handle on this. You have to be aware of this. A really major solar flare, if it passes across the Earth, if it hits our Earth, particularly in the very correct position when we're in the right direction, it will absolutely burn everything that's electronic and put it out of business, period. And it'll start, obviously, the first of these waves, if they're solar flare-type waves coming across the surface of the Earth. The very first thing is it wipes out all of the communication satellites, all right, because that's the first thing out there. It's it's only a few hundred miles above us, so it won't take but a few seconds to reach Earth itself. But the first thing we'll do would just totally put out all of the satellites. So we'd just be totally blanked out. There would be no more television at all that's satellite transmitted, no more military communications. The left hand would not know what the right hand is doing. Then, with only a second or two after that, it would totally wipe out the electronics here on Earth. And again, whether it's a 20% of the Earth, or if it's 30, 60, 80, or 100%, would depend on how much it was, how much of it slipped through the openings in our atmosphere that normally protects us from that, the electromagnetic natural shield that we have on a regular basis. But if, depending on how much is struck on the globe, the face of the globe, all of the electronics will be gone.
This has nothing to do with Snowden, does it? I mean, certainly I know that
it does to the extent that he came forward and said that's one of the things they're also keeping secret.
Oh, he did mention they're keeping it secret.
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay,
That was
fine.
my point. Maybe I wasn't clear. And this was just a couple of weeks ago, and nobody made a big deal of it. It kind of slipped out, and then, as usual, if it's of a real urgency, it just sort of disappeared into the trash can of news. But he claims, again, that another point that out of all the paperwork that he took with him, or I say paperwork, of course, computer chips, information, all that information, a big important point was come sometime around September, October, in that period of time, we're now just talking 60 days away, he says that they are seriously convinced out of Washington that we will be struck with solar waves, flares that will terminate our electronics.
Well, let me just add to what Bob is saying. If you're out there in the listening audience, you'd like to have verification of what Bob is saying, certainly you need to call our 800 number, 800-544-8927. Go right ahead, Bob.
Right, and the reason I say this fits in because it absolutely fits in. I feel that I've been working on this for so long.
It's either EMP, and that would be either suddenly from detonating a nuclear weapon 300 miles over Omaha, Nebraska, or the very even more imminent danger of a solar threat. We do have Harvey in Florida who's been waiting patiently. Harvey, are you still there?
Oh, certainly, Stan. There's no problem at all.
Did you have a question for Bob?
Yes, I do. You know, I think this all started with so many people being so desperate for a paycheck that they could fill up the ranks of the military, the contractors by the millions, computer experts, torturers, millions and millions of people they needed to put this web into place, this web of deceit. And so many of them keep their mouths shut. They'll just take that measly paycheck, which is just worthless paper that they print, and keep their mouths shut and not say a word. It's so unbelievable that so few people would have the courage to come forward out of the millions and millions of people that are involved in this web of deceit. Isn't this amazing, Stan?
Well, basically, Harvey, these people have all signed secrecy agreements, and basically they know very well they'll be put to prison. God bless and thanks for calling, Harvey. Now we have Glenn calling us from Pennsylvania. Glenn, do you have a question for our guest?
I wanted to mention these embassy closings that are in the news today in the Middle East. And when I correlate that in my mind with those stories that I've read in the mainstream media as well as Patriot media about Assad sort of tightening the noose on the mercenaries in Aleppo and this one other town, such that, you know, if they finish up on this, it could be the swan song for the mercenary rebellion there. And if I correlate that with the stories that I heard a week or so ago about the U.S. supposedly training troops in the Carolinas somewhere for actual on-the-ground action in Syria, it seems to me that it's conceivable that they could be planting some sort of false flag to provide a justification for the U.S. putting troops on the ground there.
Well, we already had 1,000 troops in Jordan. Let's get Bob's thoughts. Bob, what do you think about the closing of the...
Let me just do an overview on this whole thing in terms of some kind of a false flag. My feeling is that the bad guys in government intend to declare martial law at some point in time, and that they plan to do it before certain other things take place, and they will utilize some kind of a major false flag, obviously, to do that. When that is and what it is and what it's connected to, I have no idea at this point in time. But you do have to be aware of false flags can be generated from any little thing that they want to do it in. So I wouldn't poo-poo that. But I wanted to get back to one thing that we were talking about, Stan. I have an extraordinarily interesting thing. If everybody would grab a piece of paper and a pencil very briefly here. I came across something the other day that from NASA, and people, you want to look this up for yourself. It's NASA. Look up Cassini, Cassini spacecraft, and the word Saturn for the planet Saturn. They have kept secret for 20 years an absolutely amazing, unexplainable thing that's going on the surface of Saturn. But what they've discovered is some type of a large rotating hexagon circling the North Pole of Saturn. And it appeared originally to be a storm. It is gigantic, but the crazy thing is that this maintains a perfect hexagon. In other words, 6 straight sides to form this huge hexagon configuration. They have no idea what it is. This is 15,000 miles wide. It's gigantic, and it is 60 miles thick. It is in the shape of a hexagon. It is revolving and has been there without moving. It changes a little bit in the inside. The interior changes periodically in its contrast and size or in its content. But externally, it is a hexagon of gigantic shape. And
Bob, we're going to have to let you go because we're out of time.
Running out of time.
Well, basically, we'll have to get you on maybe next week, and we can talk more about it. God bless you, Bob. Thanks much. Great. And Glenn, are you still there?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay, do you have anything parting to say? I'm sorry we didn't have more time for you. You'll have to call in earlier. Parting thought.
Yeah, they recently deployed the Sophia infrared observatory aircraft to the southern hemisphere, I know. But in terms of short term, I really think there's something else political going on with this Middle East thing. I wouldn't be surprised if, I don't think it'll be martial law, but I think they want to provide a justification for an invasion of Syria.
Oh, and the average American doesn't know it. Thank you so much for calling. Okay, fine. Well, this is Dr. Stan. We're moving into difficult times. If you'd like to join the Radio Liberty family, we'd love to welcome you.
You know, the NASA programs, if you ask somebody right now, an average American, you say, what's going on with the space and with NASA? Basically, you say, well, that's kind of shut down, isn't it? You know, that's the impression we get. The impression we get that, in fact,
The NASA programs they're really not doing much of anything. And if you keep track of it, which I do, it's every day or two there are huge things going on. There are big events taking place. There are shots going up still every every month or so. We have the space station. We have, again, like I said, multinational cooperation. They're sending their people up on a regular basis. They're continuing to build these things. They're continuing to carry out all sorts of very, very important space projects. And as far as the Americans and, well, actually, as the world is concerned, it's kind of like, oh, it's sort of been shut down to almost nothing. The difference now, because we had sent a photographing telescope way out in space and passed close enough to where they could now get some real good pictures close up of Saturn. Now, remember, we think of Saturn as the big old planet out there and has all the big disk floating around it, which is all just sort of a space debris and junk floating in a big circle around the outside of it. But what they had found at the North Pole is this gigantic rotating hexagon. Now, it's rotating on a regular basis. I believe it's 10 hours. There's one revolution every 10 hours and 35 minutes, something like that. All right? They can't make out what it is, really. It appears, it looks like a structure, but they're not wanting to admit that it might be something like that. First off, it's really big. It's big enough to fit 3 Earths into the middle of this hexagon. Okay, so that's how large it is. It would be the equivalent of across the diameter of 3 Earths across in the middle of this thing. And it's circulating, rotating on a regular basis, 10.5 hours every day, day in and day out. So this rotates around. Now, what's really extra interesting also, there is a radio impulse signal that comes out, and they're implying that it comes from the center of Saturn, and it comes out giving out a specific radio impulse, and it's on exactly the same time sequence of one revolution of this huge hexagon on the North Pole of Saturn.
But what's the significance of it?
Well, first off, what is it? In other words, if this is a physical structure, it is mind-boggling in terms of its size. Number two, if it is a physical structure, who did it? And now they've been watching this for, like I said, 20 to 30 years. All right. And again, originally it was just like a vague kind of a thing. They thought it was maybe storms going on a regular basis there. But then as they got in closer and closer,
in other words, basically they have all these things and they're all classified because they don't want the American people to know. And why not let the American people know? Supposedly we have a free society. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a free society. The government has all sorts of secrets. You go to work for the government, you sign a secrecy agreement, and basically if you ever reveal what you've ever learned there, why, they can send you to prison for the rest of your life. Go right ahead, Bob.
I've discovered so many secret equipment, aircraft, spacecraft of different types that we have now finished. We've had finished, and programs of that sort. The use of electronics, and there's so far what you and I used to see in our regular science laboratories at school. They're just so far advanced, and they're not sharing this stuff with the. And I almost don't. I understand that you if you want to control people, which the intent is of the bad guys in government, if you want to control them, again, you don't want them to have too much. You know, they certainly don't want us to have the right to have arms. That's a big problem. See, that bothers them, because when they do martial law and clamp down on us, for whatever reason it may end up being, that's why they've been buying all the bullets themselves, and they've been buying all the weapons, and they've been digging the underground facilities and putting the foods under there, and doing all of those sneaky, underhanded operations, and at the same time not telling us step by step when things are discovered. You know, where would we be if they had kept the secret of, Edison's and the original creation of electricity and the light bulbs and all of those things and all of those inventions, Alexander Graham Bell's telephone. Where would we be if they had kept all that from the general public and just hooked it up for the government to use? We'd still be wandering around like we were in the 1890s. Trying to figure out how to feed the horses.
Well, if we have an EMP, a electromagnetic pulse attack, maybe we will be back there. In fact,
right. That may clean our slate, and then we'll all be right back again. And that's not going to be it'd be very indiscriminate. So the bad guys are going to be in trouble with that too. And therein lies...
And that really does why it doesn't make sense, because basically I would think they would be doing everything they possibly can to basically, prevent this thing from happening, and the bad guys are not doing everything they can. That's what doesn't make sense, which makes me feel that there is another force out there that we don't know about.
Yes.
Go right ahead.
Right, and that's my feeling. I think what has all of a sudden been the realization of, again, I use that simple term, the bad guys, all of a sudden, I think there was the complete realization that there is some cataclysmic event going to take place. It's headed toward us. There may not be a good way to put a date on it today, but that it apparently, because of the expenditures in the last 10 years and the activities in the last 5 years, it appears that they are worried that it's going to take place rather soon. Now, whether this an electromagnetic force, the flares, if it's a natural thing for like corona events coming out of the sun, or if it's in fact an enemy that has the ability to just throw in a couple of bombs, dirty bombs, in a couple of areas and blow out all of our electrical system. That I don't think that's not what it is. See, it's way, way above that. And so what their thought is, well, we're going to save X numbers of people, maybe 1 million people that we are designated we're going to try to save. So they're going to go underground. They've got all of the foodstuffs underground. They've got their generators. They've got their fuel to run them for some unknown period of time, depending on how many are in there in different holes. And this is serious. This is all done. I mean, and when I say done, I mean it's done sufficiently so that next week, if it happens, a bunch of people will be underground and will be living, and the rest of us on the top of the ground are not going to be.
Well, Bob Fletcher, what would we got to talk about tonight?
Well, I guess, what everybody's been talking about for hundreds of years, I guess, and that's the weather. We can talk about the weather, and we have introduction into the weather system of some very strange things that we don't commonly have. We're not just talking about common weather structures, which, of course, we've been noticing the Midwest getting pulverized with tornadoes, and the hurricane season coming upon us with the prediction of having maybe 30 or 40% more hurricanes than usual.
And, basically, we're seeing snow suddenly in the Middle West, in the middle of May, the end of May. I know I was down at the wharf here in Santa Cruz this last Sunday, a weekend, and basically the gentleman who owns one of the restaurants there said, have you ever seen as much wind as we're having now? He's been there probably for 30 or 40 years. And his comment to me was, I've never seen this much wind before. And he was talking about the wind here on the west coast of California. You're absolutely right. Something is altering our weather. What could that be? Is this simply an act of God, or is it possibly an act of men? Go right ahead.
Well, it may be partially, because it could be the act of man. As we know, they've been fooling with weather and weather control and alterations, and of course the Chinese now they've had this huge weather control operation for a few years. Once they were able to steal all the latest mischievous electronic weather manipulations that the United States has. But I'll tell you what I'm positive it is at this point. And again, I've talked about this before, and we're working on it to put it into a configuration so everybody will understand it too. But we do have an approaching astronomical problem, and that is the Nibiru or Planet X or whatever you want to call it. It's been given 3 or 4 different names.
Tornadoes, and certainly some of these tornadoes ordinarily they'll sit down on the ground for 2 or 3 minutes and wreak havoc. This last one that was certainly there, and it was going through, basically we were talking on the ground for 15 or 20 minutes, and suddenly just destroying everything in its path over something 17 miles long and 3 or 4 miles wide, just massive destruction. But you go right ahead, Bob.
Well, there's several things going on right now. We have slowly approaching, and of course they've not been able to definitively calculate where or what, actually when the closest passing is going to be, but some point in time, possibly within the next year, maybe a few months, maybe 18 months. There is an anticipation and concern about the huge, what is the 10th planet, with this Nibiru that's been out and makes this huge 2,000 to 3,000 year orbit of the Earth, and they're genuinely anticipating it, and that's what I've been working on, is when I tried to find out where billions and billions of dollars have gone to here in the last 10, 20, 30 years, and how the increase of money is vanishing, and huge amounts of money, not the regular money stolen by criminals out of Washington, which is in the millions at a time, but where this money was going, and I finally figured it out.
But what does that have to do with this planet?
Well, what it has to do is they know it's coming. They are refusing to formally notify the people of the Earth in general. The elitists at the highest levels are building hideouts for themselves in all of this. It's starting to now, for the first time in the last couple of years, or even the last year, it's starting to flex its muscles by as it approaches other planets in our solar system. From the outer planets inward, it's been changing and altering and causing atmospheric changes on those planets. It may be even affecting the sun. And as of yesterday, NASA photographed with their observatory what is possibly the largest solar coronal hole, a hole in the atmosphere of the sun itself. And what this has permitted, which June 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, if there's any impact at all, we will feel it from this in terms of geomagnetic storms and aurora borealis that we're not used to at all around possibly both the poles of the Earth. And depending on when what they call major blasts of solar wind and magnetic fields have blasted out of this hole as of yesterday. And it will be about June the 2nd or the 3rd, it'll be crossing Earth's path. Now, depending on what direction the Earth is at the very time that these bombardments come from these solar magnetic storms, when they hit the